KungFu Heroes and Little Ninja Brothers have become cult favorites on the NES over the years, largely due to the fact that two players can team up and play the co-op campaign simultaneously. And save for a little jank that I'll get to, the games are decent. Most folks may not even realize that KungFu Heroes and Little Ninja Brothers are canonically related. They were the first two games released in the Ninja Boy series, known as the Super Chinese series in Japan, a series that produced over a dozen entries over a 20-year span. However, most of the games never made their way to North America, and the ones that did had different titles. KungFu Heroes started out as an arcade game and was titled Super Chinese, and the sequel, Little Ninja Brothers, was, surprise, known as Super Chinese 2. I know what you're thinking. I bet Super Chinese 3 was next. And you'd be right, but again, it released on the Famicom and never left Japan, so it doesn't have a westernized title to go along with it. So let's see what's up with the Ninja Boy series of games on the NES and Famicom.
パンチとミラクルキックで妖魔軍団を打ち破り人魚姫を救え本格カンフーアクションゲームスーパーチャイニーズ
2001年のクリエイターたち
6月19日発売。
In this top-down co-op beat-em-up, you play as a, kung-fu hero. And in typical NES plotline fashion, you have to save Princess Min Min, who is locked away in a castle. To do this, you need to go stage by stage and trounce enemies either by punching them or doing a moonsault kick. No in-between. No regular kicks, no slabs, no grapples, just punches and moonsaults. Your character's name is Jackie, and if a friend joins you, they'll play as Lee. Jackie and Lee are young friends who have been taking kung fu lessons together, or so the manual says. Enemies roam around the screen and each requires a different strategy when attacking. Some it might be better to punch, especially if they are moonsaulters themselves, while moonsaulting is super fun and hopping all around the screen and taking out enemies with your deft maneuvers is empowering. If enemies get the drop on you, you could moonsault right into your own demise, so it's not an attack you should spam. The enemies get harder as you go, eventually able to shoot projectiles at you, so you'll need to be mindful to stay out of their direct line of attack. And while you're kicking butt, you'll also want to destroy a lot of the surrounding infrastructure like bushes, columns, and rocks in search of power-ups like special weapons, increased punch or kick power, and other items that can help you specifically against certain bosses. Eventually, once you've dealt with enough enemies, the door at the top of the screen will open and let you pass through to the next stage. Each level has 4 stages and then a final boss, and sometimes mini-bosses will appear in regular stages. Some stages even have environmental hazards, like this one where lightning zips across the screen ever so often and can be a real pain to dodge. A lot like real lightning, which I hear is near impossible to sidestep. There's also bonus stages you can find in some levels where you can gain some extra lives and power-ups by dodging what I think are slow-moving bullets while you punch bubbles. You know, just kung fu stuff. The game features 8 castles, each one named after the boss you fight at the end. There's Spearman's Castle, Gunman's Castle, Buffalo's Castle, and then there's some Demon Cat Castle, and then just Demon's Castle. I guess you fight the Demon's Cat first, and then the demon himself. Then there's a castle simply called the Castle of Tricks, followed by Dragon's Castle. And then the last castle is simply known as the Last Castle, and it's guarded by Robert Redford. For me, this one falls a bit short with its lack of precision and the fact that enemies don't really indicate when you've hit them. A little flash of the spray could go a long way on those enemies that take multiple hits. Killing them is pretty obvious, they explode to bits, but for bosses and tougher enemies, it's hard to tell. And when trying to stay out of a line of attack or dodge projectiles, you'll swear you were far enough away sometimes, yet you still take one on the chin. You get 3 lives to start, although you can gain extras, and the good news is that there are infinite continues that start you back at the beginning of the level you're on. Levels are short, after all, and you just have to whoop enough A on each screen to move on. The challenge is rarely about killing the enemies, it's mostly about staying alive long enough to do it. Little Ninja Brothers is where this series kicks things into another gear. Again, this was released on the Famicom as Super Chinese 2, and there are a small number of regional differences between the two versions. It's been said that Little Ninja Brothers is actually slightly more difficult than the Japanese version. Compared to the first game we just talked about, the action is much the same, where you fight enemies in these arena-style areas to move on. Here, the narrative is pushed forward through a top-down, world-roaming RPG format like Final Fantasy. And this game can be played with 2 players, with the second player having the ability to jump in at any time in the story, so you and a pal can roam town to town, following quest lines, and kicking some A as Little Ninja Brothers. You take control of Jack, not Jackie this time, and Ryu, not Lee. And you have to defeat the Yo-Man clan, Yo-Man clan, to restore peace in the land. And just like many of the well-known RPGs of the day, you experience random encounters, but, as stated, the combat isn't turn-based. At least, not always. There are some command-based battles later in the game. It's more akin to something like Zelda 2 in this regard, where you have to fight the enemies on screen in real time in order to continue on your journey. Before a battle commences, you often have the opportunity to flee if you think your enemy skill is so far beyond your own that you don't stand a chance, but the combat is simple and very akin to KungFu Heroes. Punches and moonsaults can get you by, while punching the occasional block can also wipe out enemies in the path. There's also dragon kicks, shurikens, and swords you can use, but the use of these things are limited, and you can keep track of how many you have left at the top of the screen. Busting up the blocks and obstacles on a battle screen can net you some helpful currency and power-ups. If you collect 6 of the M's, you get a chance to obtain brief invincibility. The manual calls it fighting with invincible balls. So that's something. Towns have standard RPG fare. You can chat with the townspeople for hints and clues about where to go next. The thread connecting the dots in the game are pretty easy to follow. Most of the hints are directional, go north, go east, etc. Towns have convenience stores where you can check your items, buy some revival potions for your partner, or get a password for continuing the game later, which is super clutch. Hotels let you rest and replenish, just like any old inn would. This one is very accessible. The game has 3 difficulty levels you can choose from at the start, too, which wasn't very common in the day for games of this ilk, so that's pretty cool. There are even some training mini-games spritzed in that help you get acquainted with some of the skills and systems in the game. There's a lot more to this one that I don't have the time to cover here, but if you're looking for a light RPG experience that you can play with a friend, this one is accessible, easy to pick up and play, very lighthearted, and fun. Definitely check it out. It's too bad they didn't make any more games like this, or did they? Good news, they did make more games like Little Ninja Brothers back in the day. The bad news is that it was trapped on the Famicom as Super Chinese 3 until very recently. Not long ago, there was no translation patch for English-speaking players, but now you can play this sequel to Little Ninja Brothers and understand where the townsfolk are telling you to go, and you'll be happy to learn that the game is very much like Little Ninja Brothers, but improved, with some better graphics and some old-school cutscenes to push the story along. The battle areas and enemies are more varied and detailed, with better colors and more environments. The only downgrade for me is the use of blue as a backdrop for the menu. I prefer the black, but that's just a nitpick. Basically, if you like Little Ninja Brothers, there's no reason you wouldn't like Super Chinese 3 from what I can tell, so if you have the ability to play with the translation patch, do it. The Super Chinese franchise had 3 Game Boy games. 2 of those, Ninja Boy and Ninja Boy 2, made it to North America. The Super Nintendo got Super Ninja Boy, but Super Chinese 2 and 3 stayed in Japan on the Super Famicom. KungFu Heroes laid the groundwork for the action that the rest of the NES and Famicom era games thrived on, but the RPG and open-world elements of Little Ninja Brothers and Super Chinese 3, not to mention the ability to co-op a game like that, really pushed those over the top. If you've never played those games before, check them out. Until next time, as always, look out for Robert Redford and his invincible balls, and thanks for watching.